All right, Shabbosai, good evening. Let us begin with some beautiful Gemara ahead of us tonight. So we're picking up on Tesvav on the base 15b, and we're picking up at the two dots. Amar Tevi Kara velo diktek bos yosel. So it's about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 18 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, the Mishnah said, Kara velo diktek bos yosel. What happens if one reads Kriyas Shema, but he was not careful? He was not careful with the articulation of the words. So remember again, there the Mishnah also records the machlokes as to whether or not one is yotzei the mitzvah. So Rabbi Tavi Amar Rabbi Yoshia, halacha k'divrei shteim lahaka. Rabbi Tavi says in Rabbi Yoshia that the halacha follows both of the opinions in the Mishnah, ultimately again to be mekel, for lenient purposes. Now Rashi points out here, what does this mean? Number one, halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda lo b'ishmiya. Number one, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that bidi eved, if you do not hear the words of Shema, you say it, but you don't hear what you're saying, that ultimately again you'll still be yotzei. And the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, that even if you are not careful with the articulation of the words, ultimately again you are still yotzei. Okay, but Rabbi Tavi Amar Rabbi Yoshia, my dechsev, was a beautiful Gemara. So Rabbi Tavi said in Rabbi Yoshia, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Shalosh heina lo tisabana shaol va'otzer rechem. So we'll say the Gemara over here is quoting the pasuk from Mishlei. So the pasuk says as follows. Literally again, there are three things that are never satiated. Right? What are they? Shaol. Shaol means the grave. Otzer rechem, the narrow part of the womb, and aretz, and the land, and the earth. So what does this mean? Says the Gemara, V'chima inyan eitzel shaol, inyan shaol eitzel rechem. I don't understand what's the common denominator amongst these things over here? What's the comparison ultimately again between the shaol, literally again the grave, and the womb? El lomer lecha, ma rechem machnis umotzi, just like the womb takes in, right? It takes in again the zera, the semen of the man, a motzi, and ultimately again births out the child. Af shaol machnis umotzi is incredible. So to the grave takes in, and also at a certain point will birth something. So they both say, so obviously, what is this a reference to? It's a reference to the resurrection of the dead. Tchias hamesim, Mashiach. Right, so incredible. The Gemara says, what's the kal v'chomer? Uma rechem shemachnisin bo bechashai motziin mimenu bekoli kolos. So the womb, right, which takes in ultimately quietly, right, but yet again when it births the baby, it's done with a lot of noise, right? Koli kolos, a lot of cries. Sha'ol shemachnisin bo bekoli kolos, the grave which takes in with a lot of noise, crying. Certainly again, when the grave, so to speak, births something, that's also going to be again bekoli kolos with much noise. And this Gemara is a raya for people who try to reject the notion of Tchias HaMesim, who say that there's no such concept as resurrection of the dead. Now obviously, this is not a pasuk from the Chumash, it's a pasuk in Mishlei, but nevertheless it's a pasuk in Tanakh, and from this pasuk in Tanakh you see a scriptural allusion to the concept of Tchias HaMesim. This in general is part of an interesting discussion about, in general, in the Torah, you'll find no references to Mashiach and no references to Tchias HaMesim or things like that. You'll find veiled references to it. So in general, which is interesting, given something that is so core and central to our belief system, yet you're not going to find it. In the Chumash, Risham Shnafal Hirsch has a beautiful insight. He explains that's because Judaism is very much like a life-centric religion. That really, if you notice again, the Torah, right, we believe in the world to come. Right? And where in the Torah does it talk about the world to come? The answer is, it doesn't. It doesn't. Torah doesn't, which is so interesting, right? The belief in an afterlife, in the world to come, is like one of Rambam's core principles. And yet you will not find it in the Chumash, says Risham Shnafal Hirsch, because again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us focusing on the next life. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us focusing on this world, how to maximize this life. Judaism is a life-affirming religion. Risham Shnafal Hirsch is very interesting. He says, that's why you'll notice, it's always interesting that he explains, he says, churches, whenever you see churches, you'll often find a cemetery attached to a church. He says, shuls, you will never find that. You'll find it, by the way, like in Eastern Europe, But that's because of issues of land ownership, right? That's often because Jewish communities were only allowed to own a certain amount of land, so you had to use the same land for everything. So he says, why is it? Why is it that shuls historically didn't have cemeteries attached? Because again, we are a life-affirming religion. You know, we see this. We see this contemporarily. We see this in this current struggle that Klal Yisrael. You look at the fundamental difference between Am Yisrael and Hamas. What's the if you want to just drill down to the core of it, one is a culture of life and one is a culture of death. That's it. That's it. So in other words, if your whole glorification of life is nothing to do with this world, but it's whatever you think is waiting for you after, you kill yourself, you blow yourself up. So again, it creates a whole... Meanwhile, for us, everything is about the preservation of life. Everything is about the affirmation of life. It's incredible. Incredible. So therefore, again, you'll find the scriptural allusion to Tchias HaMesim, but you won't really find any psukim devoting all that much time to the world to come or to the Yemos HaMashiach. Baruch Hu wants us to focus on maximizing this life. Incredible. Tani Rabbi Oshia Kamei Derava Uksaftam. Bozik says Uksaftam. So remember again, this is talking about the Uksaftam al mezuzos beisach v'sharach, the obligation to write a mezuzah. So the Gemara says Hakol biksav. Ultimately, again, when writing the parashos for tefillin or for mezuzos, you have to include the entire section. Afilu tzavaos, even the psukim themselves that are the command to write mezuzos and to write tefillin, those psukim themselves are included. Amalei, Damar Lachamani, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Yehuda Da'amar Gabi Sota Alos Kosev Tzavaos Eno Kosev. Right? Ultimately, again, Rabbi Yehuda holds that by Sota, remember again, Sota is the one who's suspected of adultery. Again, it's a little bit more of an intricate process than that. But Lamaisa, remember, you take this section of the parashah Sota, you write it on a piece of parchment, you dissolve it in the water, and she drinks the water. On that parchment, we write the curses. Alos Kosev Tzavaos, the actual instructions you don't write. V'hasam hu dichsev kasam esa alos. That's because by Sota, the Torah itself says you write the curses on a piece of parchment. Aval hacha dichsev uksavtom afilu tzavaos nami. So we'll say that's the distinction by Sota. It says you only write the curses. But over here, when it comes to mezuzah or tefillin, it's ksavtam. Ksavtam means ksiva tam, a complete writing. So just pointing out is that in this section of mezuzah, you'll also write the Torah's instructions for writing the mezuzah. Okay, interesting. Adu tamid Rabbi Yehuda mishum dechsev v'kasav is Rabbi Yehuda's logic because it says v'kasav. Tamid Rabbi Yehuda mishum dechsev alos in tzavaos lo. Rabbi Yehuda's whole logic by Sota, Rabbi says, because the Torah by Sota says you should write the curses. The fact that it says you should write the curses indicates to us that you write the curses, but not the instructions. It's Drech Chamina Nelev Ksiva Mehasam. I might have thought that I should learn how to Gzer Shava Ksiva. Ma Hasam Alos in Sava Oslo. Just like by Sota, you only write the curses, you don't write the instructions. Af hachenami tzavaos lo. So too over here by mezuzah, perhaps I should only write about the mitzvah, but not the instructions. Kamash malam. Rachmanas. Kasav rachmana uksavtom afilu tzavaos. Okay, so just pointing out that by the section of mezuzah, Shabbos, what's interesting to point out is in the section of the Torah that you write to put in a mezuzah, you include in that the actual mitzvah to write the mezuzah. Right? So in other words, the actual instruction, the actual command is actually written to be placed inside of the mezuzah itself. Okay, beautiful. Tani Rabbi Ovadia, Kamei Rava. Pasuk says, V'limaratam. So I'll say the Pasuk says, V'limaratam osamas benechem. So literally, again, you will teach these things to your children, a reference to Torah. So the Gemara says, Shiehei limudcha tam. Teaches us that ultimately, again, your limud, your learning, or in this case, it really is your writing, your learning or your reading should be complete. What does that mean? How do you have a complete reading? So the Gemara says, Sheyitin revach bein hadvekim. That I will say specifically in Shema, when you have words which could easily blend into each other, you have to make sure to pause in the reading so as to sufficiently articulate each word individually. What are some examples of this? So the Gemara says, Ani Rava Basvei, give you some examples. Kigon, al levavcha. So remember again, what's unique about al levavcha? Two lamids, right? Al, ayin lamid, and levavcha lamid. So if you read that quickly, what does it sound like? Al-Vavcha. Al-Vavcha. In other words, because you could easily go ahead and like condense the two lamids into one lost sound, thereby blending the two words. So therefore the Torah says, V'limadatam, that when you read them, the reading has to be enunciated and articulated, and therefore words that could easily blend together, pause and articulate them individually. Al levavchem, b'chol levavcha, b'chol levavchem, esev b'sadcha, va'avaratem mehira. In other words, whenever you have two words, right? And again, the last letter of the first word and the first letter of the second word are the same, there's a danger of blending the words together. So in those words, in those phrases, you have to make sure to pause so as to articulate the words independently. Va'avaratem mehira, hakanav psil, eschem me'aretz. Okay, beautiful. On Rabbi Chanina. So Rabbi Chanina says as follows. Kol hakori kriyashma. Kol hakori kriyashma. Umedaktik bos yosel. Anyone who reads Shema and is careful with the words. Careful with the words. So in other words, I take the time to read the words appropriately. I make sure not to swallow them one into the other. What does the Gemara say? Mitzanin lo Gehenim. It's interesting. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will cool down Gehenim for you. Now, again, depending where you're coming from in life, that could be a really good thing, right? So what's interesting to note is, it's just a fascinating to kind of like the dichotomy over here. On one hand, you'll have like statements like if you say Shema 3 times a day, you're going to Olam Haba, right? I'm sorry, Ashrei 3 times a day, you're going to Olam Haba. And then other statements like if you say Shema and you articulate the words correctly, Kadosh Baruch Hu will cool down Gehenim for you, which is something as well. Shenamar.
Throughout Torah, we talk about what you're doing to get away from Gehenna and to get into Olam Haba. Even if it's not listed explicitly, every musar, everything is based on whatever you do now is for the cruise door getting there. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. I'm saying it's confusing when you say it's a life affirming thing. As long as you live Torah for the next life, then it's life affirming. Right?
Say it again.
Meaning it's all about specifically following everything in the Torah 100% to get to Olam Haba and not Gehenna. Meaning it is about the afterlife.
It's not about the afterlife. It's about this world, but there's a recognition that this world is not the end. In other words, being focused on the afterlife is a misdirection of energy. The focus, ultimately, again, is maximizing my life in this world. Now you'll ask, but why? I'm only here for 120 years. So what? That's when the afterlife comes in. I think the mistake that sometimes people make is they minimize, in other words, when Mishnah Perkei Avos says that this world is like a prison, like an antechamber to the world to come, there's a danger in misunderstanding that statement. The danger is in the cheapening of the existence of this world. That's the danger. So always just saying before, what Shasha was trying to say before is, of course you believe in the world to come, and the world to come is eternal, when this is temporal, but all of that, ultimately, again, is meaningless if you don't maximize this. Does that make a little more sense?
Even if it's not an emphasis in the Chumash, like you're saying, it seems to be more of an emphasis in Mishnah and Shas.
It's an emphasis in Chazal. Correct. Absolutely. There's an emphasis. There's an emphasis.
Literally everything. Right?
Yeah. There's an.
What do you get better Olam Haba. What do you get? You get less Gehenna.
Right. But here's what I would tell you like this is, I at least what I take from these kinds of things. Whenever the Gemara talks about, this idea. What does it mean? Let's go with this. Like, what does it mean if you're careful with the words of Shema? Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to cool down Gehenna for you. What does that mean? What does? I'm sorry. It's symbolic, right? But
you can do everything else terribly, but if you do this right, you get something for it.
Right. So, think about that just for a second. Just seize on that for just a second. And I think what Chazal are telling us is not like that Gehenna is going to be 5 degrees cooler. And I don't think that's what it's saying over here. Right? I think what Derek is saying is a lot of times in life, in our approach to spirituality, we think that it's all or nothing. Either you're doing well or you're not doing well, right? You're on board, you're on Team God or you're not on Team God. I think you see Gemara like this and you see, you know what? It's not an all or nothing thing. That I could be doing a lot of things wrong, but if I pull it together for one, nothing else in my spiritual life is in order except, I say Shema nicely. The Gemara is saying, that counts. That counts. How much does... So when I see these Gemaras, I don't actually see a message for the afterlife. I see very much like a message for this world, that even like, never fall into the trap of thinking that because you're misfiring on every single other level that what you do positively doesn't matter. It does. It does. How much does it matter? Even if something, so to speak, just cools down Gehenna, that's meaningful also, I think. All right. Shneimar ferish alay melachim al tashlik b'tzalmon al tikri ferish ella b'farish al tikri b'tzalmon ella b'tzalmon. That's good. V'rayim arachamar v'chanil. Lama nismechu. Ohalim l'nechalim. What's I tap of Tezayim? It's actually very beautiful. What's the meaning of the juxtaposition on the pasuk? Ultimately, again, from tents to streams or rivers. The Chsiv Gemara quotes the pasuk from Chumash Bamidbar. Ki nechalim nitayu, ki ganos alei nahar, ki ohalim nata Hashem karazim alei mayim. So why does the pasuk juxtapose? Ultimately, again, tents to rivers. So the Gemara says, Lomar lecha manachalim ma'alin es ha'adam mituma l'tara. Just as a stream or a river could change a person's status from tameh to tahar, right? Again, if I'm tameh and I go to the mikvah, so the mikvah has the ability to change my status. Af ohalim ma'alin es ha'adam mikaf chov l'kaf schos. It's so beautiful. So to the ohel, what does the ohel represent? O represents Torah. O represents Torah, that the juxtaposition in the pasuk between tents and water is teaching me that just as water has the ability to affect purification, so too the process of learning Torah has the ability to affect purification. As I will say, I just want to point out the beauty in this Gemara is it's saying, it's two things over here, by the way. You see, Rashi understands Ohalim to refer to Batei Midrashos, the Beis Medrash. The Beis Medrash. So there are two lessons you can learn from this. Number one, just the cathartic power of Torah, which even if Torah doesn't lead to observance, and even if Torah doesn't lead to a change in behaviors, but the process itself of engaging in Torah is a cathartic one. This is a cathartic one in and of itself. But also Rashi is saying is over here is that the oil is the Beis Medrash. And I will say, sometimes a person should never underestimate the power of putting yourself in a positive atmosphere. You know, sometimes just, this is like a big thing, one of the things that's happened, which and many positive things like of COVID, is there was such a proliferation of like online learning, and like a lot of people kind of stayed in that lane, and that's beautiful. It's Talmud Torah, it's fantastic. The only thing sometimes you miss out on is coming into a Beis Medrash, because being in a Beis Medrash puts you in an atmosphere of holiness that compounds whatever else that you're doing. And one can make the argument, even sitting in a Beis Medrash itself, even if one is not learning, by definition, one is putting themselves in an atmosphere of positivity, and that has a positive impact upon the individual. So like two lessons over here. So like the pasuk is equating again the tent to the stream. The stream water has the ability to transform someone who is tamei into someone who is tar. The ohel, either Torah itself has the ability to transform a person, or just the ability of putting yourself in the right circumstance, the right atmosphere, has the ability to transform you as well. Let's do one more line. So the Gemara says, "Akor l'mafreya lo yatsa." So the Gemara tells the story over here as follows. The Gemara says that if one read Shema, right, Shema out of order, right, so B'Pashtos, this is not talking about the paragraphs, but rather it's talking about the psukim. If you read the verses out of order, you're not yotze. Says the Imar Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, Havukakatrin le Ginana le Rabbi Lazar. This is actually very beautiful. Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were literally tying the chuppah for Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar is getting married, and his friends are making the chuppah. Amar Lohos, listen to this. Rabbi Lazar says, right, you guys are busy. Adahachi v'hachi ezel ve'eshma milsa debei midrasha. You know what? Since you guys are busy making the chuppah, I'll go to the Beis Medrash. Let me hear what they're learning in the Beis Medrash. V'aisi ve'ema luchu, and I'll go and come back and I'll tell you what they were learning in the Beis Medrash. Okay. Ashkechi l'tana diktani kamid Rabbi Yochanan kara v'ta'a v'nadeh lehechanta. So they were where he got. So Rabbi Lazar gets to the Beis Medrash, and they're going over the following halacha: that if a person is saying Shema, he made a mistake and he doesn't know where he's up to in Shema. So what should you do? So the Gemara says, Be'emtza parak yachsalosh. If you're in the middle of a paragraph, go back to the beginning of that paragraph. Bein parak leparak yachsal parak rishon. If you're between paragraphs, go back to the earlier paragraph. Bein ksiva leksiva yachsal leksiva rishona. If you're in the pasuk of uksavtem, and you're not sure, is it the ksavtem of v'ahavta or v'ayim shamoa, go back to v'ahavta. Someone Rabbi Yochanan said, Lo shano elo shelo pasach b'leman yirbu yimechem. That's only if you didn't if you didn't begin the phrase of Leman Yirbu in the paragraph of Vayam Shamoa. Ava pasach b'Leman Yirbu Yimechem Sarachei Nakat Va'asi. Sarachei Nakat Va'asi. So I will say, if you already said Laman Yirbu, that's indicative that what? That you are in Vaya'im Shamo and not in V'yahavta. So I will say, this in general is an interesting halacha, right? In this halacha Lamaisi, you make a mistake in Shema, you're not sure where you're up to. Essentially, you just go back to the beginning of the section that you were in, right? You're not sure you're in the Ksaftim of V'yahavta or in Vaya'im Shamoa. Go back to V'yahavta, unless of course you began Laman Yirbu, then again that's indicative that you're in Vayayim Shamoah. So what happened? So Asa v'Amar Luhu, so Rabbi Lazar came back and he told over this halacha to Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. So Amrulay, they said to him, Ilu lo banu el lishma davar zeh dayenu. So beautiful. And they said to him, even had we just come, right, not to make your chuppah, but just to hear this halacha, dayenu, that would have been enough. All right, so we'll say shkoyach, stop over here for tonight. Again, same schedule for tomorrow night. Shkoyach on the tea. Incredible. Thank you. Thank you.